Welcome to another deep dive. Today we're going to be tackling a mystery that's both intriguing and chilling.
It is.
The Redhead Murders.
Yeah.
So imagine a string of unsolved homicides spanning over a decade, all with one eerie connection.
Okay.
The victims were redheaded women.
Now, what makes this case even more fascinating is the uncertainty surrounding it. We don't even know the exact number of victims.
Right.
Some sources point to 5, others suggest 14, and some believe there could be even more out there.
That's right. And to add another layer of complexity, it's unclear whether we're dealing with one killer or multiple perpetrators. We've got police reports, news articles, even some fascinating work from a sociology class that took on this case, but no clear answers yet.
It really highlights how challenging these kinds of investigations can be, especially back then when forensics wasn't as advanced as it is today.
Right.
To understand this case, we need to consider the context of the time.
Absolutely. We're talking about murders that took place between 1978 and 1992. So imagine trying to connect these dots without the DNA, technology, or national databases we have now.
Exactly. But let's start by defining what we actually mean by the Redhead Murders.
Okay.
It wasn't just about hair color.
Right.
Many victims were found along major highways, often partially clothed, suggesting a possible connection to hitchhiking or sex work.
That geographic pattern adds another piece to the puzzle, doesn't it?
It does.
Were these women targeted specifically because they were vulnerable, or was it simply a matter of opportunity for the killer?
It's a question that has haunted investigators for years.
Yeah.
To get a clearer picture, let's delve into a few specific cases you've probably heard of. Lisa Nichols.
Yeah.
She was found along I-40 in 1984 wearing only a sweater.
Yeah. Her case is particularly heartbreaking because it took 9 months to identify her.
Right.
Can you imagine the agonizing wait for her family not knowing what happened to their loved one for so long?
I know.
It makes you wonder why identification was such a hurdle back then.
Well, in Lisa's case, she was estranged from her family, which unfortunately wasn't uncommon among the victims.
Okay.
This made it incredibly difficult for investigators to connect the dots. It wasn't until a couple in Florida recognized her from a missing persons report that they finally got a break.
It's a reminder of how crucial those missing persons reports are, even if relationships within a family are strained.
Yeah,
Every piece of information can be vital.
absolutely.
Hmm.
Now, Lisa's case relied on someone recognizing her, but advancements in technology have changed the game since then.
Yeah.
Take the case of Tina Farmer, for example.
Okay.
She was identified in 2018, a full 33 years after her death.
Wait, so they had her remains all that time and couldn't figure out who she was?
That's right, back in 1985 when she was found. Fingerprinting technology wasn't as sophisticated. Plus, she wasn't entered into national databases when she was reported missing, which sadly wasn't a legal requirement in all states back then.
Wow.
It was only when her fingerprints were re-examined with newer technology that they got a match.
That's incredible. It makes you realize how many other Tina farmers might be out there just waiting for the right technology or that one crucial connection.
It's a sobering thought.
It is.
But technology isn't always the answer. Some cases rely heavily on those small, often overlooked details.
You're thinking of Tracy Walker, aren't you?
Yes.
A 15-year-old girl found near a strip mine. What struck me about her case was the mention of a button necklace found near her remains.
Right.
Such a small detail, but potentially so significant.
Exactly. That necklace could be a crucial clue,
Yeah.
but also raises a ton of questions.
Yeah.
Was it hers a gift? Did it have sentimental value? These are the kinds of details investigators latch onto, hoping they might lead to a breakthrough.
And then there's a spy pilgrim. Her case stands out because of one truly bizarre detail.
Yeah.
She was found in a refrigerator. I mean, who does that?
The refrigerator's a strange one, isn't it? It raises questions about the killer's motives and whether there was a deeper meaning behind this unusual choice. Was it simply a practical matter of transporting and concealing the body, or something more symbolic and disturbing? What do you think?
It's hard to say, but it definitely adds a chilling layer to the mystery. And to complicate things further, these murders didn't just happen in one location.
Right.
We're talking Tennessee, Arkansas, Kentucky, Mississippi, Pennsylvania, West Virginia. It's a vast geographical spread.
Right, and that spread suggests the killer or killers might have been highly mobile. Perhaps someone whose job involved frequent travel across state lines.
Okay.
It's one of the reasons investigators focused on truckers as potential suspects.
Which makes sense given how many victims were found along highways, but that doesn't explain the inconsistencies in the evidence, does it?
It doesn't.
We have victims found clothed, others not. Some showed signs of sexual assault, others didn't. If it was one person, wouldn't we expect a more consistent pattern?
That's a great point, and it's one of the central questions that has fueled the debate.
Right.
Are we dealing with one killer or multiple?
Yeah.
Perhaps there was a copycat element at play, someone inspired by the initial murders, or maybe the killer's MO evolved over time. It's hard to say for sure without more definitive evidence.
Which, as we know, was limited back then, especially when you consider the technology available to investigators in the 1980s. I mean, DNA testing was still in its infancy, right?
Absolutely. To really understand the challenges investigators faced, we need to delve deeper into the forensic limitations of that era. That's something we'll explore in the next part of our deep dive.
I can't wait to unpack that further. It's
Yeah.
amazing to think how far forensic science has come and what those advancements might mean for solving cold cases like this one.
Yeah.
We'll be back.
Yeah, we'll be back.
As we were discussing those inconsistencies in the evidence, it really struck me how much harder it must have been for investigators back then without the tools we have today.
Yeah, it's mind-boggling when you think about it. Trying to piece together a puzzle like the Redhead Murders without the benefit of instant DNA analysis, national databases like NANIS, or even basic internet communication.
Right, trying to coordinate information sharing between different states relying on eyewitness accounts and painstakingly sifting through physical evidence. It sounds like a scene out of an old detective movie.
Except this was all too real for the victims and their families and for the investigators trying to bring them justice. Remember, in the 1980s, forensic science was a different world.
Speaking of forensics, you mentioned DNA analysis being in its infancy. Can you explain what that means for listeners who might not be familiar with how it works?
Of course, today, DNA profiling is a cornerstone of criminal investigations. But back then, it was a brand new technology. It's expensive and not widely available. Imagine trying to link a suspect to a crime scene without that irrefutable genetic fingerprint.
Right.
Investigators had to rely on less precise methods like blood typing or hair analysis, which could be inconclusive or even misleading.
That makes the case of Tina Farmer even more remarkable, identified decades later thanks to advancements in fingerprinting technology. It makes you wonder if DNA testing could crack open some of the other Redhead Murders cases.
Absolutely. DNA has revolutionized cold case investigations. It's not just about matching a suspect to a crime scene. It can also help identify victims who were previously unknown, like Tina. And with the rise of genetic genealogy, investigators can now use DNA to track down distant relatives and build family trees, potentially leading them to suspects they never would have considered before.
That's incredible. So even with all the limitations they faced, investigators did manage to develop some leads. We talked about the two trucker suspects earlier. Can you remind us why truckers were considered prime suspects in this case?
So remember the geographic spread of the murders. Truckers, by the nature of their work, travel extensively across state lines, often along the same highways where many of the victims were found. This mobility made them fit a certain profile.
It's like something out of a crime novel, but in this case, it was tragically real. And for one of those truckers, Jerry Leon Johns, that profile proved accurate. He was later linked by DNA to the murder of Tina Farmer.
That was a significant break in the case, but also a bittersweet one. Johns died in prison in 2015. So while it brought some closure to Tina Farmer's family, he can never be questioned about other potential victims.
Which brings us to the other trucker suspect, the one who was dismissed from the investigation. Can you shed some light on why he was cleared and if there are any lingering questions surrounding his involvement?
This is where things get a bit murky. This particular trucker was questioned after a kidnapping and rape in Indiana, but he was ultimately ruled out as a suspect in the Redhead murders. The Redhead murders, now, the reasons for his dismissal are unclear from the sources we have, but it's possible that evidence from that other crime didn't align with the Redhead murders, or perhaps there were alibi issues.
But his dismissal doesn't necessarily mean he's innocent, right?
Exactly. And with advancements in DNA technology, there's always a chance that old evidence could be retested, potentially connecting him to one or more of the unsolved murders.
Right.
Cold cases are rarely truly closed, especially with the dedication of those who refuse to give up.
That's where that sociology class comes in, right? The one that took on the Redhead Murders as a project.
Yeah.
I'm still amazed by what they were able to accomplish. It's like a real-life citizen detective story.
It really is. Their work is a testament to the power of fresh eyes and a different perspective. Sometimes you need someone outside of law enforcement, unburdened by preconceived notions, to look at the evidence with a new lens.
And they potentially identified 3 new victims. That's huge.
It broadens the scope of the investigation, potentially revealing new patterns or connections that could lead to a breakthrough. Think about it. A group of students driven by curiosity and a desire to learn potentially made a significant contribution to a decades-old cold case. It's inspiring.
It really shows that you don't need a badge to make a difference. Anyone can contribute to the pursuit of justice. So, where does that leave us with the Redhead murders? What are some of the key takeaways you think we should be focusing on?
Well, first and foremost, this case highlights the human cost of these unsolved mysteries. We can get caught up in the forensic details and the theories, but it's important to remember that behind every case file, there are real people whose lives were tragically cut short. Their stories deserve to be told, and their families deserve answers.
Absolutely. And speaking of answers, the Redhead murders also demonstrates how the evolution of forensic science has changed the game. What was once a frustrating labyrinth of limited evidence and dead ends can now be re-examined with tools that were unimaginable back in the 1980s.
Precisely. DNA analysis, genetic genealogy, online databases. These are all game changers in the fight for justice, and with their help, we might one day see a resolution to this chilling mystery.
I'm holding on to that hope, but for now, the Redhead murders remain a haunting reminder of the complexities of unsolved crimes and the enduring search for truth. We'll be back in the final part of our deep dive to explore some of the theories surrounding this case and the ongoing efforts to find answers. Welcome back to the final part of our deep dive into the Redhead murders. We've examined the chilling details, the challenges faced by investigators, and the evolution of forensic science. But one question still looms large.
Yeah.
Who is behind these horrific crimes?
That's the question that has kept investigators and armchair detectives alike captivated for decades.
Right.
There's no shortage of theories, each attempting to make sense of the seemingly random nature of these murders.
Right.
Some are more plausible than others, but they all reflect the desperate need to find answers to connect the dots in a case that often feels like a puzzle with missing pieces.
So let's dive into some of those theories. What are some of the most prominent explanations that have been put forward over the years?
One of the most prevalent theories centers on the idea of a transient killer. This theory suggests the perpetrator or perpetrators was someone who moved around a lot, perhaps a truck driver, as we discussed earlier, or someone whose job took them across state lines. This mobility would explain the vast geographic spread of the murders.
Okay, it's a theory that makes sense, especially when you consider how many victims were found along major highways. But if it was one person operating over such a wide area, wouldn't you expect more consistency in their methods, the MO, as they call it in crime shows?
You're right to question that the inconsistencies in the evidence, the variations in how the victims were found, have fueled doubts about the single killer theory. Some experts believe that we might be dealing with multiple killers operating independently, perhaps even copycats inspired by the initial murders.
The thought of multiple killers targeting redheaded women is terrifying. It adds a whole other level of complexity to the case.
It does, and it makes certain details like that victim found in a refrigerator even more disturbing. That specific detail has led some to speculate about a possible ritualistic element, suggesting the murders might have been part of some kind of symbolic act or a killer driven by a very specific and disturbing fantasy.
I can see how that detail would spark those kinds of theories. It's just so bizarre. But is there any actual evidence to support the idea of a ritualistic killer in this case?
Unfortunately, no. A lot of the evidence we have is circumstantial, which makes it difficult to draw definitive conclusions. But the lack of a clear motive, the seemingly random selection of victims, has left the door open to all sorts of speculation.
It's like we have these puzzle pieces, these intriguing details, but we can't quite fit them together to see the complete picture.
Exactly, and that's the frustration of cold cases like this.
Yeah.
They're filled with unanswered questions, but that doesn't mean we should abandon hope. New leads could emerge.
Yeah.
New technology could be applied. There's always a chance that one day we might finally have the breakthrough we've been waiting for.
I certainly hope so. Now, for our listeners who are intrigued by this case and want to delve deeper, what are some resources they can explore? You mentioned websites dedicated to unsolved mysteries earlier.
Absolutely. There are some fantastic online resources for anyone interested in true crime and cold cases.
Okay.
One that comes to mind is the Doe Network.
Okay.
It's a nonprofit organization that works with law enforcement to help solve cases of missing and unidentified persons. They have a comprehensive file on the Redhead murders with detailed information on each victim and potential leads.
The Doe Network is amazing. I've spent hours on their website getting lost in all sorts of unsolved mysteries. It's fascinating and heartbreaking at the same time. What other resources would you recommend?
Another great one is NAMASAHES, the National Missing and Unidentified Persons System. It's a national database and clearinghouse for missing, unidentified, and unclaimed persons cases across the United States.
Yeah.
Their website allows you to search for cases, submit tips, and even upload your own DNA to see if it matches any unsolved cases.
Wait, you can upload your own DNA. That's incredible. It's like taking citizen detective work to a whole new level.
It is, and it's already proving to be a powerful tool in solving cold cases.
Right.
So for those listeners who want to actively contribute to the pursuit of justice, those websites are great places to start. You never know. You might just hold the key to unlocking one of these mysteries.
This deep dive has been truly captivating. The Redhead Murders, with all its twists and turns, remains one of the most perplexing unsolved mysteries out there. Before we wrap up, I want to shift our focus for a moment. We've talked about the victims, the investigators, the theories, but there's another group of people who are often overlooked in these cases, the families of the victims.
You're absolutely right. It's impossible to fathom the pain and anguish of not knowing what happened to your loved one, of living with that uncertainty for years, even decades.
Yeah.
The Redhead Murders is not just a collection of case files. It's a story of countless lives, shattered families, left grappling with unanswered questions and a longing for justice that may never be fully realized.
And so, to the families of the victims of the Redhead Murders, we want to say this. We see you, we acknowledge your pain, and we hope that one day you'll find the answers you seek.
And to our listeners, if this case has sparked your interest in true crime and the search for answers, I encourage you to explore the resources we've discussed. You never know. Your curiosity and dedication might be the missing piece that helps bring closure to one of these unsolved mysteries.
Thank you for joining us on this chilling journey into the heart of the Redhead Murders. Until next time, stay curious, stay informed, and stay safe.